So I'm here with Dr. Doug Mills, and he's been working with us on the ergonomics of using water-fed poles. And what he offered to do is put together what you could call like a glossary, isn't it? Like something,
Yes,
a foundation understanding.
Right, yeah, we start with body mechanics, what the optimum position the body should be in, or the limbs and the components of the movement should be in to affect the least trauma possible during your work experience.
So whether this thing that you're about to explain has nothing to do with water-fed poles, it's all to do with just understanding the basics, so that everybody, when we go to sort of talk about using water-fed poles or tools or ladders or whatever, that they actually understand, you know, what it should be like.
That's correct. It's just generalizations that can apply to any situation, any work situation, any play situation. You want to follow these general precepts.
So I'm going to let you take the floor.
Okay, we'll talk about body mechanics. Okay, my name's Dr. Mills. My specialty is occupational medicine, and today we're going to talk about body mechanics, the proper way to drive through power movements and to use your limbs to try to avoid injury. The ankle first. The ankle is not a terribly complex joint, but it's a little bit more complex than a simple hinge joint. It has elements of a hinge and a ball joint. So you have some range of motion. You have inversion, eversion, extension, and flexion. And the best way to drive off the ankle in a power movement is to have the foot straight ahead and in line with the direction of travel. So you'll notice sprinters will have their foot directly behind them, not at an angle. There are situations though when you have your foot at an angle when you're driving off, and it causes undue stress on the ankle and the knee. Now talking about the knee, getting to the knee. The knee's a hinge joint, pure and simple. There's no rotation at the knee, or there shouldn't be. And if there is, you've got a problem. The knee certainly needs to be in a neutral position if you're driving off a power movement, such as pushing forward. You don't want to have your leg turned away from the direction of the movement. You'll do all kinds of bad things to your knee. An example of that is a baseball player, right-handed, getting a pop-up, needs to get to first base. Well, if he steps in and swings and he pushes off towards first base with that foot not toward first base, they rip their meniscus, very common injury. So they're always taught to when they plant their foot and swing, to pivot on that foot and then push off. So the swing, pivot, push off. If you swing and push off, look at the knee. I mean, there's a lot of stress on that. So you don't want to be pushing off this way. Now I know you're going to say, well, fencers do it, right? And they do, and they get meniscal tears quite frequently. They have their foot kind of sideways like this, and they do suffer meniscal tears. Also, you can think about climbing a ladder. You cannot keep your feet straight ahead in a power motion when you're climbing a ladder, because your knees will hit the rungs. So you literally have to tilt your legs out, so you're climbing the ladder maybe even kind of sideways like this. That can eventually wear out your knees, your menisci. The hip is a ball joint. There's a lot of range of motion with the hip. You got internal rotation, external rotation. You have abduction, adduction, flexion, extension. There's a big range of motion with the hip. That's the femur. It's a ball joint. That's not usually a problem with power movements. So we'll go to the back. Of course, the lower back it can be a problem if you're not using good posture. If you're using your large muscles here to maintain your posture by leaning forward and lifting a weight, you put a lot of pressure on that lower back. Your back is it's like a lever arm. So if I'm holding a weight out here, that's a very long lever arm. It's putting a lot of pressure on the lower back. And of course, everybody knows about slip discs and that sort of thing, and torn muscles. So you really want to keep the heavy items that you're carrying close to your body, and common sense. Also, you don't want to have your body rotated while you're doing a power movement. You want to stay straight. Again, you have to stay straight on these power movements. The anatomical position for moving forward is with the legs straight, the hips straight, and to move forward that way. The more you twist the body, the more you twist the knee, the more you get the feet out of line in the direction that you're heading, the more potential for injury you have during a power movement. Okay, for the shoulder, we'll talk about the shoulder as just an attachment for the humerus, which is the bone of your upper arm. And the bone of your upper arm is actuated by many muscles. You have power muscles and you have control muscles. The control muscles are the rotator cuff. And there's 5 rotator cuff muscles, and they serve to rotate the humerus. So if I bend my elbow, then this is a pure rotatory movement now, right? And I'm using no power muscles at all here. I'm using all my rotator cuff muscles. These rotator cuff muscles are relatively small muscles that traverse the AC joint. They come from the back of the scapula to attach to the humerus in various points that allow for rotation of the humerus, For the first part of the abduction of the humerus, or pulling the humerus away from the body, is the supraspinatus. Then the big deltoid takes over. So mostly rotatory in nature. Those muscles are very weak and rather delicate muscles, actually. Of course, your power muscles are your lats, your latissimus dorsi for pulling, your trapezius for shrugging, and of course your pecs for pushing away, for pushing forward. So again, the best position for movement with the shoulder, so you don't use the rotator cuff muscles for power movements. The worst thing you do is use rotator cuff muscles for power movements, because you'll just simply rip them. They're not big muscles. They have small insertions. They're easy to tear. You've heard of rotator cuff tears. The best way is to have your body in line with what you're pushing. Let's just put it that way. Now I can push in this direction with very little risk of injury. But if I rotate my arm inward, in other words, adduct my arm and push, I'm starting to use my rotator cuff muscles for stabilization, and and for power movement. That's a bad idea. So you want, if I were to push something, I would want to push it this way, not this way. Okay. And of course, any repetitive motion movement, you want to just use your power muscles for that. You don't want to do repetitive motion stuff with a rotating muscle. You want to do, if I had a cable here resisting here, that's my rotator cuff working, compared to doing the same amount of work just pushing away. Would be a much less chance of being injured. So you don't want to use your rotator cuff muscles for repetitive motion or power movements. You want to just use those for control, fine control movements. The neck, of course, you want to keep that in a neutral position as much as you can. Again, you want to consider that these straight ahead movements are the neutral position. Let's talk about the elbow. Of course, the elbow is a hinge joint. There's no real rotation at the elbow. The only reason you can rotate your arm like this is because there's 2 bones in your arm, and they're crisscrossing like this. So it's not actually a ball joint at the elbow. It's kind of a complex mechanism, kind of neat. The elbow is not a problem really. Usually, there's really not a position you can get the elbow in that's going to give you a problem with the power movement. But a lot of the grip muscles are attached at the elbow. So if you're gripping repetitively, you can actually get tennis elbow, especially if you're using the wrist extensor a lot. If you're using power movement coming back like this, you get tennis elbow. If you're using it this way, like you're curling a weight, you can get medial epicondylitis. Tennis elbow is lateral epicondylitis, medial, lateral. So really the elbow, most of the problems in the elbow arise from the muscles of the wrist, moving the wrist. The wrist itself, of course, everybody's heard of carpal tunnel. There's de Quervain's tendonitis, which is a tendonitis of the extensor of the thumb. That can be crippling. Of course, any tendonitis can be crippling. Anybody who's ever had tennis elbow can attest to that. And then you can have carpal tunnel. Everybody's heard of carpal tunnel, where the nerves run through a little tunnel in the carpal bones. They can swell up in there, cause your hand to be numb, weak. You can have an ulnar neuropathy here that causes your hand to be weak, because the ulnar nerve takes care of the intrinsic muscles of the hand. Also, it's your funny bone nerve. It makes you numb in the fourth and fifth fingers. So it's really important with people who have a job that has repetitive motion to stay in the most neutral body positions they can, not to use small accessory muscles like rotator cuff muscles for power movements, and to try to stay out of an injury groove, which means you don't want to do the same thing all the time. You want to change it up a little bit, especially if you're doing something that's using the smaller accessory muscle groups.
Well, that was awesome.
Oh, thank you. I tried.
You're quite the educator.
Not much of an actor, but a pretty good educator, maybe.
So, is there anything that you missed? Is there anything, like, how passionate are you about this?
You know, my entire life has been spent, trying to make people's lives a little easier. I mean, I'm really interested in the things people do and the things they can change so they can have a better quality of life.
And sometimes the change doesn't have to be much, does it?
No, it can be very little. Yeah.
And when you're changing them towards that center that you just explained to us, right? You're
Yes.
always changing them back towards what's correct, or
Right.
in line, keeping things straight.
Right. Yeah. You can make an analogy with many things in your life that way. You don't want to get too far out of hand in anything, but yeah. And nothing's perfect, and you can't remember the rules all the time. But if you keep them in mind and you try to change your environment to line up a little bit better with that, then your chances are you'll have a better time of it. Yeah.
And I think that also one of the things that you sort of talk about is this kind of like two injuries. There's one which is an injury you can have in the moment, like a trauma, and then there's the other injury, which is, you coined that phrase, the injury groove, right? Which
Yes,
is a
repetitive motion.
A repetitive motion injury.
Repetitive motion injury, yeah.
And that robs the person of their quality of life at the end of their working life. So they work their whole life, grind their way through all this stuff.
Right, including their joints, tendons, menisci, and grind their way through is right.
So, sometimes when we're talking together, you talk about these two kinds of injuries. One of them is the trauma, you'd say, like the guy injures himself on the job, or the guy pops his knee or something like that. But the other one is, you coined that phrase, like the injury groove. Tell us about that.
Right, well, that has to do with repetitive motion injury. If you do the same thing over and over with the same motion, even if it's anatomically neutral motion, it could cause an injury. Later in life, it can literally wear down the joints.
Right.
And
that kind of, the guy or the girl or whatever works their butt off all their life, right? Puts away some money, expects to get some quality of life, and just these few things wrong kind of will rob them of that. They'll be in pain.
Yes. At the end of it, they have to have knee replacements. They have to have sometimes even shoulder replacements. I mean, it just gets.
And they've got things that don't work, and hands that don't open, and fingers that are stuck, and
yes, absolutely.
You see, and you've seen all that, yeah.
Yes, oh, absolutely, daily, and that's from work trauma.
Yeah.
Work trauma. Unless their hobby is rugby, it's usually work trauma. What else is it going to be? Yeah.
So the basic rules, like just to wrap this up and say the basic rules, if you've got two sets of muscles, which you put into the group, one is power muscles and the other is control muscles.
Yes.
Power muscles are big and strong,
Harder
and,
to injure.
and hard to injure, and control muscles are
Small, and that their insertions are slight, and they're easy to injure, and easy to overuse, easy to fatigue, which makes you much more clumsy, which takes you out of your, takes you off your game when you're doing some complex movement.
So if somebody's using a power motion, they should use it in alignment. How
Yes.
do you say that?
Yeah, you want to stay as anatomically neutral as you can, and you want to keep your limbs in the best anatomic position that you can,
Which means
for the
like
movement.
arms move this way, legs move
Move
that
this way. Yeah, it's pretty
right?
simple actually.
Not so much twisting going
Yeah,
on.
you don't want too much movement to the midline, too much movement laterally. You don't want your limbs to be rotated too much.
Right.
The neutral position is the position you're in when you just relax. Now you notice my hands and my arms are rotated just slightly inward.
Right.
Right, just slightly inward, not like this. If I relax right now, my hands fall inward.
Yeah.
So this is the neutral position. So for me to push, this would be the best way I could push.
Right.
Okay. Now if I rotate my hands out like this, I
And
can't
now
even
you're
push
using your
that way.
control muscles.
Yeah, now you're using your rotating muscles.
Yep.
Yeah,
The smaller ones.
if I were to push this way, it would be not as strong for one thing. You're using
Right.
rotating muscles, the rotator cuff muscles, to affect power movement and that sort of thing. So you want to stay in the neutral anatomic position. Same with your trunk. You don't want to have your trunk twisted when you're pushing.
Right.
You want to go straight ahead, your feet straight
So
ahead.
if somebody's climbing a ladder or something like that,
Ladders are
isn't it?
impossible. You can't climb a ladder anatomically neutral. You have to get sideways,
Oh,
and
the
you have
both
to.
legs sideways.
Yeah,
or-
I mean
no,
it's in
no.
your knees. Your knees are being stressed. Your back's being stressed, and to get up a ladder.
Right.
Yeah,
So control muscles, use as little as possible,
right.
and learn about your power muscles and use them in an anatomically
Neutral fashion.
fashion.
Right. That's the goal. Of course, you can't all the time, but if you can 10% of the time, or 20% of the time, or 50% of the time, then you absolutely will. That'll serve to avoid injury.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Both traumatic injury and
And repetitive motion. Yep.
motion injury.
Yep. They go hand in hand a lot of times.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You're a good man, Douglas Mills.